This is the current plaza in front of the Texas State Supreme Court, directly adjacent to the Capitol building. While eyesore might be too strong of a term, it's a less than inviting and somewhat shabby entrance to the halls of justice, and certainly not on anyone's must-see list when they come to visit the Texas Capitol, which over 1 million people do annually. And this is the Bill of Rights Plaza, a complete reimagining commissioned by mybillofrights.org and designed by Holly Kincannon of Kincannon Studios in Austin, who's here with us today. It features 10 granite tablets, each engraved with the full text of one of the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution, as well as seating walls integrated into 2 symmetrical sculpture chains, which are highlighted by 10 lotus blossoms sculpted from Brazilian soapstone representing the flowering of our freedoms. And each of these sculpture chains is connected by a gentle cascading fountain and water garden and accompanied with formal landscaping to provide shade and ambience, with the current hardscape surface being replaced by this lovely pattern design of granite pavers. Now, as Holly explained it to me, the architectural challenge was to create an elegant transition between the Victorian Capitol and the modern Supreme Court building, as well as a new formal entranceway to the court, while also providing an area of respite for all those visitors to the Capitol, along with those who work there, where they are invited to contemplate the founding principles of a free society. Judging from the before and the after, I think Holly's risen to that challenge. But more importantly, so did everyone involved in the 3.5-year process of legislative, state agency, and stakeholders' approvals process, with the result being that the Bill of Rights Plaza is now fully approved to begin fundraising with a projected cost of $4.1 million. Now, if you're like me at this point, you're asking yourself, what on earth leads anybody to take on that kind of commitment? In my case, it was a joke, seriously. I'm a stand-up comedian, and I was doing some material about the constant battles over the displays of the 10 Commandments on public grounds, and my suggestion was that instead of taking them down, we should put the Bill of Rights up next to them so that people could comparison shop. Because the Bill of Rights gives you an amazing deal. It tells you speak freely, carry a gun, pursue happiness, and then it presumes that you are innocent, and my religion won't give me anything close to that deal. Now, I'd been doing this material for a little bit over a year, and at the same time watching with dismay the increasing bitterness of our national conversation, and wondering if there was something that I could do to have some positive impact on that, and maybe rekindle some recognition that our common ground is our strongest ground. And then one night, in a fit of idleness, I decided to Google Bill of Rights monuments. And I was surprised that nothing came up, except that there was one excerpt from a blog post that said that there were already hundreds of such monuments around the country, which when I clicked on the link, it took me to a series of photographs of garbage cans, essentially saying, this is what's become of our rights. And I knew that I'd found my common ground project, because the left loves the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Eighth Amendments, and the right loves the Second, Fourth, Ninth, and 10th Amendments. And we all love my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. And so my thought was, this is exactly what we should do. What better way than monuments to reconnect us with our heritage? As someone who'd grown up in Washington, D.C., this made perfect sense to me. Because by showing each new generation what those before them felt was so important that they had literally carved it into stone, monuments connect us with our history in a way that makes it visible, tangible, and unforgettable. So as I'm sure a lot of you in this room have done when you've felt that you've discovered some new and amazing idea, I immediately set out to see if I could find someone else to implement it. And after 2 or 3 failed attempts, I quickly realized that all the people I knew who were willing to make that kind of commitment already had to something else. So I was pacing around my office, and I made the mistake of glancing at the mirror, and it was like telepathy. Because without a word being spoken, I swear I heard that person say to me, "Hey, Chris, why don't you do it? How hard can it be?" Well, that was a little over 6 years ago. And in that time, I've gained a whole new appreciation for the phrase, "it's a monumental task." And I understand why people in the digital age don't immediately grasp the power of monuments. Because when it comes to information technologies, they are hopelessly slow and analog. But when it comes to preserving and spreading cultural memes, monuments have a pretty good record. I mean, why do you think that we're still studying the Egyptians and the Mayans? Other than natural wonders, only monumental architecture has shown that kind of lasting hold on the human imagination. And I don't think there will ever be an app to replace that. Although we do have the Bill of Rights in binary code along with 13 other languages on our website. And I always tell people that's so when the aliens finally do get here, probably just in time to survey the wreckage, at least they'll be able to take some of our best ideas along with them. Which is the truly remarkable thing about the Bill of Rights, the scope and power of its ideas and its brevity. In less than 500 words, the Bill of Rights manages to supplant the divine right of kings with the unalienable rights of the individual, lay out due process, probable cause, and the presumption of innocence, establish the right to bear arms and against self-incrimination, and prohibit both torture and confiscatory fines, all in a framework of checks and balances that manages to prevent the excessive concentration of power in the hands of the few and also protect us against the tyranny of the majority. Now that is the entire legal and philosophical framework for setting up the institutions of a free, just, and civil society in what would be less than a 4-minute TED Talk. And definitely ideas worth spreading, which they have, beginning in our own country. Because when the Bill of Rights was ratified, its provisions only applied to roughly 4% of the human beings living in the United States. They didn't apply to slaves, or women, or Native Americans, and they really only applied to white males of more than a certain property and status. And yet there isn't a single exclusionary phrase inside the Bill of Rights. Not one exclusionary piece of language. So as our concept and understanding of freedom grew through the experience of it, as well as the wrenching tragedy of a civil war, we had the blueprint in hand. And one so effective that today we just assume that these rights should apply equally to all. And they've also spread throughout the world, where the Bill of Rights has become the global template for the human rights movement, and a basic demand invoked by people everywhere seeking their freedom from oppression. Now that's a remarkable record of achievement to build on, and I don't think that that spread is incidental either. I mean, we always talk about freedom as if it's some unmet imperative within the human spirit. And maybe it is. But you know, it's also a practical force in the world. The freest societies are the most successful societies because freedom shortens the learning curve. I mean, when you're allowed and free to make your own mistakes, which is how we learn most of what we learn, then you're going to learn that much more, that much faster. And when you magnify that over an entire society across 2 centuries in time, it's no wonder that we are where we are today and that the freedom meme is continuing to spread. Although for myself personally, I've never thought so much about freedom or had so little of it since I started mybillofrights.org. But that's the thing about monumental tasks, they tend to narrow your commitments. And I think that's probably what I've learned most in the last 6 years, the true nature of commitment. Because I used to think about commitment in terms of promises or vows or obligations that you take on. But what I've discovered is that it's a transformational energy that when you open to it, can change your whole way of being. Now, right after I started mybillofrights.org, I was invited to speak at a conference in Scotland, where the headline speaker was Sir Bob Geldof. And for those of you who don't know, Geldof was the first Irish rock star to go cosmic on the global stage. When he set up the Live Aid concert in 1985, which was the first global concert event that something like 2 billion people watched in 150 different countries. And the day before he'd spoken at this conference, he'd actually gotten British Prime Minister Tony Blair to agree to join with the European Union in pledging $25 billion towards addressing some of the root causes of poverty in Africa. So what I was expecting to hear was someone who was going to walk out and deliver a talk that would be inspiring to everybody on how they could go out and save the world. And instead, what I heard was a story that began with a declining rock star who thought he might write a song about Christmas because it could help Oxfam raise a couple $100,000 so they could feed a few more starving kids in Ethiopia. Only the song turned out to be Do They Know It's Christmas? And 25 years and $700 million in royalties later, Geldof was no longer a rock star, but he was someone that could get world leaders to sit down and listen and learn and then work together on developing new approaches to reducing poverty and hunger on a global scale. And as he told this story of his own transformation, he made it sound like the most natural thing in the world. No big deal. He'd had no grand vision or plan. It was just one foot in front of the other, basic cause and effect. And as he was telling the story, he also quietly went about making these connections between things like the $2 per day subsidy that the British government was paying every farmer for each cow and bull that they raised, and the desperately bad plight of the over 1 billion people on Earth who were trying to survive on less than half that amount. And when he was finished, he took questions, the last of which was about his religious beliefs. And he kind of smiled and said, well, if you're asking the question, then you probably already know that I'm an atheist. Even though my friend Bono keeps telling me I can't be an atheist because every song I write is a hymn, and I keep telling him, no, Bono, you're wrong, that I'm an atheist. And then he talked about the time that he was walking through the streets of Calcutta with Mother Teresa. And she pointed to a starving child and said, Bob, I see the suffering of Jesus in that child. To which he replied, no, Mother Teresa, what you see there is the malignant neglect of humanity. And then he looked out over the audience and he said simply, this is not necessary, and it can be changed, which was the unstated case that he'd been slowly putting together the entire time, and it was like a thunderclap, which was made even more impactful by the thing he'd done at the very beginning of his talk, when he pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket that he said he'd been carrying around ever since 1983, when a stranger had handed it to him on a train platform. And on it was a quote from a Scottish conservationist named W.H. Murray, which he then read. There is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never have otherwise occurred. A whole stream of events issues forth from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen events, meetings, and material assistance, which no one could have dreamed would have come their way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do or think you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. Thank you.